Now, it's also important to remember that this principle that the countries that are responsible for climate change have to fix it is not a new principle. And in fact, our country, our government, has already agreed to it. The Framework Convention on Climate Change, ratified by 192 countries, including Canada, including the US, by the way, recognized the concept of historical responsibility for climate change. So does the Kyoto Protocol. This is what the Kyoto Protocol is based on. It's why in the first commitment period that expires in 2012, and the whole point of Copenhagen was to come up with the next commitment period, the post-2012 period, was that only rich developed countries had to cut their emissions because it was recognized that these were the countries that created the crisis. All of the countries agreed to that when they signed the Climate Convention and when they signed on to the Kyoto Protocol. Only the US, by refusing to sign the Kyoto Protocol, rejected this, insisting at the time and insisting still that unless China and India make the same kind of emissions as them, then they won't do anything at all. So they rejected categorically the concept of historical responsibility, whereas all the other countries that signed it accepted it. So the convention is written this way for a reason. It recognized the connection between emissions and development, that countries like India, where 400 million people still lack electricity, are living without a light bulb, have the right to development, and that in developing, in pulling themselves out of poverty, they will emit carbon. There is a relationship between carbon emission and development. It's also recognizing that not all emissions are created equal. The emissions produced to electrify that rural Indian village that has never had electricity before are not the same as the emissions that come from a third car, say, or the emissions that come from a belligerent refusal to build a public transit system that works in a country that has abundant resources to do so. There's a wonderful Indian environmentalist named Sunita Narayan, who puts it like this. She talks about luxury emissions versus survival emissions, and they're not the same. They are not equal. Another way of thinking about this is the way Bolivian President Evo Morales has started talking about it. He says that the Earth does not have enough for the North to live better and better, but it does have enough for us all to live well. So what it is that we're talking about is sharing. Are we willing to share the atmosphere? Or, as one of the leading climate debt experts, Matthew Stilwell, puts it, are we willing to share the sky? Now, when the Climate Convention was written, it was not yet clear that the effects of climate change would fall disproportionately on the poorest nations. But it is clear now, making the case for climate debt even stronger than it was when the convention was written. Now, the reason for this disparity, why it is that 75 to 80% of the effects of climate change will be felt by the developing world, is complex. Some of it is geographic, just straightforward, right? A 2 degrees Celsius temperature rise, which is the goal set by developing countries going into Copenhagen, a goal they did not meet. They're closer to 4 degrees increase if they do what they promised to do, so we're in bad shape. But even that 2-degree goal translates in Africa into an increase of 3 to 3.5 degrees. And in Copenhagen, Archbishop Desmond Tutu said that aiming for a 2-degree increase is, quote, to condemn Africa to incineration and no modern development. That's what's at stake here. Huge droughts, huge water shortages, affecting hundreds of millions of people. And for low-lying islands like Tuvalu, the Maldives, of course, geography is everything. As waters rise, their countries are literally disappearing. So some of this, yeah, it's about a fluke of geography. It's about who won the geography lottery. But in addition to these flukes, there's also the fact that the poor of the region the less public infrastructure it tends to have to cope with climate change, whether it's the money to build strong seawalls, to keep back the rising tides, or to pay first responders to respond to disaster, as we saw so devastatingly in Haiti recently. Now, it's important to recall that we in the North share much responsibility for this as well. That's because in so many cases, public infrastructure isn't weak by happenstance. It has been deliberately and systematically weakened by decades of what used to be called structural adjustment policies by the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. The policies attached to loans with our so-called aid that required countries like Haiti and Rwanda to destroy their internal markets and privatize their public sphere in order to get a desperately needed loan. So we can't just blame this on simple geography. I want to give a couple of examples with specifics of what I mean here. Because it is on all of our minds and because it has been so blasted off the news, I want to talk a little bit about Haiti. And I wrote about this recently, as many of you know, for almost its entire existence, Haiti has been carrying one form of odious debt or another, starting in 1825, when France threatened to re-enslave Haiti. They threatened this with an armada of warships off the coast of Haiti, unless Haiti agreed to pay France reparations for taking away their former slave colony. The price of the loan, the debt that was imposed on Haiti at this time, would be worth $21 billion today. It took 155 years for Haiti to pay off that odious debt, which was illegal in the first place because when it was imposed, slavery was already recognized as an international crime. So a debt imposed with the threat of slavery is an odious debt. But it was paid back nonetheless, and that was money that was taken out of the pockets of the public sector, out of the coffers of the public sector. It wasn't available for roads, for schools, for hospitals. And then there's the odious debt of the dictatorship, the Duvalier years. It's one of the strongest cases for odious debt in the world. The Duvaliers, Papa Doc and Baby Doc, left Haiti with a debt of more than $800 million. And we know the debt is odious. We know it wasn't spent on Haitians, that it went to the Duvaliers' elaborate network of Swiss bank accounts and lavish properties on the French Riviera, because there were several court cases which tried to track down this money, and they did trace it to this network, court cases in the United States and in Europe, which found that the Duvaliers should pay this money back to Haiti, but of course there was no way of enforcing it. So for more than 2 decades, Haiti's creditors insisted that the country pay millions every year in servicing this illegitimate debt. Once again, money that wasn't available to spend on the public sector. But perhaps even worse than that were the conditions that were applied to those loans and are still being applied to Haiti to this day. Haitians were forced to drop their protections for local rice producers. They had to open themselves up completely to foreign imports, which decimated the countryside and forced people to move en masse to the city, which is why it is so overcrowded. Lenders demanded that Haiti privatize its telephone system and electricity, and failure to comply was met with punishing aid embargoes, which between 2000 and 2004 dealt the final blow to Haiti's public sphere, including its first responders, firefighters, police, the people that were so pointedly absent in those days after the earthquake. Of course, I'm not saying that the earthquake was caused by global warming, but we have just seen a very clear example of this intersection between so-called natural disasters and weak infrastructure and how deadly it is.